and it just climbs off all by itself. It does it itself. Okay?
Yeah, you're right there with me though.
Every time I open the hangar door to go flying, I realize that I'm one of the lucky guys doing something that I dreamt of as a kid.
Welcome to Lebanon, Tennessee, just a stone's throw from Nashville. The little airport here may not see too many country stars, but it has a few stars of its own in the form of Warbird aircraft, such as these T-34 Mentors, owned and flown by John and Deborah Baugh. The one with the DBN number is Deborah's.
Well, this plane was manufactured in 1956. It's a Beechcraft T-34 B model, and it was originally in the Navy at Pensacola. I think it was moved to and based in Pittsburgh for a while, and then about 1986 we got it with a trade from the Navy, and it was completely dismantled and completely restored piece by piece. We added it had a 285 horsepower, which was the original engine, and later changed both T-34s to IO 520 Continentals, 300 horsepower. With the three-bladed props. It's a Noble conversion.
Coming online in the late 1940s, the T-34 Mentors were very pilot-friendly trainers. Their design was based on the civilian Beech Model 35 Bonanza.
It's just great visibility, you know, all the way around, having the open canopy. You know, if it's warm, you can fly with it, pull back a little bit and get the breeze going. So just a lot of fun. I think it's a lot of fun for people when you give rides to them to have that open cockpit view, you know, different from just any other airplane.
So if you own not one, but two beautiful Mentors such as these, just what do you do with them?
I don't do aerobatics, but we do formation flying. My husband does aerobatics in his, and I enjoy the formation and just flying around more. So we really enjoy doing formation flights for veterans and that type of thing.
Deborah probably wouldn't have flown at all had it not been for a Nashville Star connection.
Well, I always liked flying when I was young, and when I was younger I always thought I wanted to be an airline stewardess. After I finished college, a friend of mine invited me to come to the airport one day to see her boyfriend's airplane. So I went out to the airport, and Roy Clark was a steerman, open cockpit steerman, and Roy Clark was being checked out in it. And so I was just standing there quietly watching, and he started motioning me to come over, and so I'm like, who's he talking to? They said, oh, he wants you to fly. So I go over and have my first flight in an open cockpit steerman with Roy Clark. And as soon as I got out of the airplane, I went to the FBO and took my first lesson.
Japan's devastating surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, launched the United States into full-blown total war with Japan, Germany, and Italy. Our civilian economy was transformed from civilian to wartime production, it seemed, overnight. Tens of thousands of young men enlisted or were drafted into uniform to fight the war. This left millions of jobs unfilled, and women came to factories all across industry to make guns, planes, ships, trucks, ammunition, and every other conceivable product to win the war. Nearly 19 million women were in America's wartime workforce, 3 million of them for their first time away from home responsibilities. Norman Rockwell's Saturday Evening Post cover featuring Rosie the Riveter was plastered all over the country, honoring women in America's fight.
On the street, in the home, in a crowd or alone, shout wherever you may be. I am an American. I'm proud of my liberty.
And we needed pilots for combat, tens of thousands of them. All of those would be young men, so female pilots jumped in to fill that void. In September 1942, two women's pilot organizations formed separately, the WFTD, Women's Flying Training Detachment, and the WAFS, Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron. Well, in August 1943, those two were merged to create the WASP organization, Women's Air Force Service Pilots. General Hap Arnold, Chief of the Air Corps, selected the great female aviator Jackie Cochran to head up the WASPs. 25,000 women applied, 1,074 were accepted. All of them had prior flying experience and pilot's licenses. WASPs flew over 60 million air miles in every type of military aircraft. Our country is in their debt, and today we honor these great patriot aviators.
I was very fortunate to spend many years with Ed Bowlin. He was a great influence on a lot of people. Obviously, he gave me opportunities in flying that I would not have otherwise had. He taught me how to be his wingman. He taught me how to be lead. As he used to say, when people ask, where do you fly? And he says, have you ever been married? I fly where she tells me to. So that was Ed. I'd like to recognize another really good friend of ours, very good friend of ours. Dear Bud Anderson is in the audience. He lost his wife, Ellie, not too long ago. So this is to Ellie also. Bud, 16 and a quarter victories, World War II ace, Bud Anderson. And this paint scheme here on this P-51 that I've flown twice today and will be taking to Columbus here as soon as we're finished with this program back to Jim Hagedorn, where it lives. So Bud has a lot of airplanes painted like Old Crow in tribute to him, and he's certainly the one that deserves that very, very much. I would like to thank the Scotts Miracle-Gro Company for their sustaining sponsorship to make all of this Warbirds in Review possible, and the media part of this, and the live streaming, Sleeping Dog Productions, flyingondemand.com. All of this is possible because of Jim Hagedorn's generosity and the company believing in the veterans as he does. So, you know, I need to thank Jim for allowing me to fly his P-51, but he makes that much more of a program that all of you can enjoy. Additionally, we have the Fagan Fighters World War II Museum in Granite Falls, Minnesota. They are a big sponsor of what we do here, Jelly Belly Candy Company. And I have taken enough of your time, and I thank you once again. And if you'll hang with us, I think we've got a really good program for you. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm David Hartman. Please welcome Shutsy-Reynolds, Connie Bowlin, and Heather Penny. Ladies. Shutsy, start us off here. You're the star here today. What's your first memory of being interested in flying airplanes as a kid?
Boy, that's going back a long way.
Well, you just told me you were really 39, so it's not that long ago.
Well, you got to turn that one around. When I was 7, I said to my family, when I grow up, I'm going to learn how to fly. But I had the interest long before that.
What was your parents' reaction to your telling them that you wanted to fly?
You're crazy. Girls don't fly.
Boy, so what did you do? I mean, obviously you figured it out along the way. How did you go about it?
Well, I didn't really figure it out. I just knew I wanted to fly. I see an airplane go by. And when I was a youngster, an airplane going by one every 10 days, that was a big traffic pattern. I just studied. After I learned how to read, I read everything I could on aviation. I even took my brother's Boy Scout magazine to read the articles on aviation there. I was really gung-ho.
So how did you get around your parents not wanting you to fly? I mean, you had to raise the money, you had to keep it from them. What did you do?
Well, they were very supportive. If you had a
Oh.
dream, they figured, try it. If you don't make it, at least you had a dream.
Ah.
No use going through life without a dream.
So you went to night school, yes?
Well, I went to night school, but that's only because it was the CPT program. I got out of high school. They had a little article in the paper about there was aeronautical classes. I signed up.
But when it was a test, they were going to pick 5 young women, as I understand it, to have scholarships to learn to fly, correct?
Not women, men. When I reported for this ground school, I found out that there was a scholarship involved. 5 scholarships, of which only 1 could be a woman. There was only 2 women in the class, so I figured I had it made. But I also found out that the guys that were taking the course had taken it 3 or 4 times, so I figured they'd pass on perfect attendance. I took the private pilot's license at the end of the course, and the 5 highest score would get the flight scholarship, and I was one of the 5.
And then what happened?
They took it away from me.
What did they say when they took it away from you?
The war in Europe isn't going well. We need men. Women don't fly, so we're going to give it to number 6.
So what did you do to get around that?
I fought it tooth and nail. My argument was, you gave it to me, it's mine, you're giving it away, you're stealing it. So I think I made such a fuss, they gave it back to me just to shut me up.
So you had your license along with thousands of other
Right.
young women, right?
Right?
Talk about the beginning of the 2 organizations we just heard about and how they were combined to form the WASP organization.
Well, Nancy Love went to the Ferry Command, said she could find women already qualified, high horsepower ratings, thousands of hours, for a direct hiring into the Ferry Command. At the same time, Jackie Cochran approached General Arnold. Actually, she went through Eleanor Roosevelt, the president, and on down the line, saying that we need more women. Let's train them the Army way. And that's how the 2 started. When she went to England, she took 25 women with her, and they joined the Air Transport Auxiliary, the Royal Air Force. And when she came back, Nancy Love already had her group in place, and Jackie Cochran was looking for a field to start training.
So tell us about Jackie Cochran. How impressive a person was she?
Hey, she was a go-getter. I mean, you wanted something done, get Jackie to do it. She'll be right in there. I only met her a couple times on a group basis. My thanks and appreciation go to Jackie Cochran for putting me in a cockpit of a military aircraft.
Wow. What was General Arnold's attitude about women flying initially?
When he was first approached on it, he said he didn't need it, but that was before Pearl Harbor. And when Pearl Harbor came, there was a critical shortage. So he said, I think we better try it. But there was no research. They didn't know whether, he himself said, I don't know whether a slip of a girl could fly a high-powered aircraft. So we're going to put the girls in as an experiment, and if they can do the job, we'll embed them into the military.
So there were 25,000 or so applied. 1,074 eventually became WASPs.
That's right.
So what was the WASP experience like? What did you fly? Where did you fly? Where were the bases?
Well, the first 6 months was all training, and we took the same training as the Air Cadets. And it was, at of all places, Avenger Field, which we renamed Cochran's Convent. You made a mistake, you were out of there. And it was an interesting, we had girls from all over the country, different strata of the society. But we all welded together, and each one helped the other. There was no competition. We were all trying to get through.
About how many hours did you have before you started the WASP training?
About 120.
120. And what about most of the other women in that group? Were they all in similar territory or more or less?
More or less. A lot of them had gone through the same civilian pilot training program as I did. But you got to remember that was also in the college. The same program was offered to colleges. So a lot of them came from the colleges where I came from, the non-college group.
What was the attitude of the male instructors toward all of you?
They wanted us to succeed.
Right. Did you have, we hear about call signs now. We'll talk with Lucky about that a little later, but 'cause she had a call sign. But did you all have call signs?
No, this was training. I mean, the only call sign you had was your last name. That's why you call me Shutsy. That's my maiden name. It's not a call sign number.
Right.
And you were in roll call, Shutsy, shot and Sisler, run right after the other.
So how many months or years did you all fly as WASPs?
6 months of training and 6 months in active duty.
And then what happened? What was said when they no longer needed or wanted you? What happened? What was the end of the program?
You had started in June of '44. The war in Europe was winding down. They were closing down the training bases in the States. So we had two factions against us. The pilots coming back from Europe wanted to get their flying time in, and those girls are in our airplanes, and we want them out of there. So they went to their congressman and said, those are our jobs. Those are girls. They don't have the right. In the meantime, the civilian flight instructors lobbied very hard against us, because they were now no longer offered a commission in the Army Air Force. They were going to be handled a rifle and go on the invasion into Japan.
How many more years did you fly after you ended the WASP program?
Not too many. There wasn't any jobs available. I applied to the airline. They would offer a job only as a stewardess. Immediately after we were disbanded, I figured with my experience, somebody would want me, so I went to all places in Los Angeles. I went to the Russian embassy, offered my services. They treated me like a spy.
You know, Connie,
they didn't hire me either.
Connie, as you listen to this, how significant is what these women did back during World War II?
The WASP, not only did they fly airplanes, but the spunk of these ladies and the character of these ladies, that is the most significant thing for me, is that you were such a great role model, even though it took us a lot of years later for me to be able to get into the seat of an airliner. It was because of you ladies. You opened that door. It just kind of took us a long time to push it open. So they're just critical. I have so much admiration for them and their training and what they did.
Connie, when did you first get bitten by the airplane bug?
I grew up on a farm in North Carolina, so I saw the crop dusters come through, and there was no aviation in my family, but at some point I thought, yeah, that's pretty cool. So I took a few flying lessons in college, but I had, I think, maybe 3 hours when the fellow you saw on that video offered me that airplane instead of candy. So that's when I really got the bug. And he gave me the opportunity to fly airplanes, and as you gain your experience in different airplanes, you just move on and you keep stepping into different airplanes. You have to start with the opportunity.
How many hours do you have approximately?
I have over 20,000 hours, and I have people all the time come up and say, how much time do you have in the Mustang? I'm pretty sure I must have over 1,000 hours in a P-51 because I've been flying them for 30 years. I'm only 39 too, Shutsy. So I don't really know exactly how much time I have in the Mustang, but I do have over 20,000 hours in over 150 types of airplanes, probably.
150?
Yeah, probably.
And unlike what Shutsy went through, not being able to get a job, you were able to get a job in the airline. How'd that come about?
I was able to get a job in the airline, but like Shutsy, in 1970, when I became a flight attendant for Delta Airlines, they weren't really interested in women pilots. The first female pilot was hired, I think, in 1973. I was hired by Delta in 1978. They weren't so sure that they wanted females even when I came along. So I did start as a flight attendant, just as you said. That was one interesting thing. When I went in for the flight attendant interview, they said, well, you're too tall. So I went like this, you know. And then when I went in finally for the pilot interview, they said, well, we have a minimum height. And I said, yes, sir.
So you flew Delta, you captain. What'd you fly for Delta?
I started out as an engineer on the 727 and worked my way up. When I retired, I was a 767, 757 captain for Delta. It's a great career, great company. And Shutsy touched on it earlier that all of the flight instructors wanted them to succeed. I never had any bad experiences with my crew on the airline. They all wanted you to do well. When I went through training at Delta, they were there to go the extra mile if we needed to. They wanted to make sure that I wasn't just average, so they worked with me real hard to get me above average. But the guys are very, very supportive, and the same thing with the crew when you get in the cockpit.
What does that say about the change of attitude in our country toward women? Shutsy's experience compared to yours? That's a huge change of attitude.
I think from Shutsy's time to mine, which of course it's amazing to me that I have been in the flying world for over 40 years. And from that time when I started to today, the biggest difference I see is that when people look at me and say, women don't fly, and when I came along and they say, you fly? And now it's through the support in all of the women's organizations now and the networking, it is, you can fly.
Yeah, yeah.
The women pilots were experimental. In other words, they did not take us directly into the Army Air Corps. And they said, we are going to do this program. And Jacqueline Cochran had been trying since 1939 to convince the Army Air Corps that they should be training women as well as men. And she wasn't getting very far. Well, when the war first broke out, they had 30,000, General Arnold had 30,000 qualified pilots. By the end of the following year, he had 90,000. And there was still a shortage. Jacqueline Cochran, in the meantime, had been after him, and he said, well, not yet, but if we ever do anything, you're going to be in charge. So finally, he agreed that we should. In the meantime, it gets a little complicated. There was another qualified, very qualified pilot by the name of Nancy Love, and her husband flew for the Ferry Command and happened to mention that his wife flew. They had all, you know, she was a very experienced pilot. And so they got in touch with her and said, can you find some highly qualified other women pilots who could help us by ferrying aircraft, which she did. Now that was the end of 1942. In the meantime, General Arnold sent Jacqueline Cochran over to England to find out how the ATA girls were conducting their program, because they were utilizing women to ferry aircraft all over England. And she came back, and of course she was furious because she was supposed to lead this program. Her ideas were completely different. Nancy Love was working only with highly qualified pilots. Jacqueline Cochran felt that we should be trained from the very beginning. So initially they started out with, I think, 200 hours, something like that, but they got it down to as low as all you needed was 35 hours to qualify to become an experimental pilot. But they had to find a way to pay us, and so they did it through civil service. So we were not Air Corps. We were not Air Corps. So they said if the program is successful, which it was, then you will be taken into the Army Air Force. In the meantime, like, we had to pay our own way to Sweetwater, Texas. If you washed out or quit the program, because you were able to quit your civil service, then you had to pay your own way home. Also in training, we got $150 a month. And out of that, we had to pay our room and board and any clothing and any incidentals out of that $150. So, you know, $150 a month in those days wasn't bad. But you had to pay for a lot of things, especially your transportation to and from. So, and then when we graduated, because we were given 7 months training, similar to what the cadets had, without the emphasis on aerobatics, although we did learn aerobatics, because we were not going to go into combat. I think, as I said, we were formed to relieve men for active duty. So this is General Arnold, in June of '44, put a bill before Congress to have us taken into the Army Air Corps. The bill was defeated. And the reason it was defeated is because General Marshall went to General Arnold and said, I need 3,000 men for the infantry. And the next class of cadets were going to be the ones that he would be getting. And they were very upset because they wanted to be pilots. They didn't want to go in the infantry. Of course, I don't blame them for being upset. But what they did when the bill came before Congress was they told a lot of stories that just weren't true. And even though General Arnold had a lot of proof of the good that we were doing and how we were really, really needed at the time, and it did no good. So consequently, they disbanded us.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what were some of the untrue stories that they used?
That we were $1 million glamour girls, and that we were only up there as co-pilots, and that we really weren't doing a very good job. And they just got Congress. It was defeated by, I think, 19 votes by the House.
And tell us what your job was.
Well, there were two commands. There was the ferry command and the training command. The ferry command is self-explanatory. The training command, we were at 120 different bases, and we did about 12 or 14 different jobs. For instance, we towed targets for the live anti-aircraft with live bullets to practice shooting at the target. Sometimes they shot the airplane by mistake, and there were actually 2 women who were killed by this action. And altogether, there were 38 WASP who died in active duty. And then we had to fly at night in order for the beacons to be able to try to track them. We had to fly the gunners, so they got practice shooting from a moving aircraft. We had to do, one of my jobs was engineering test flying and utility pilot. In other words, taking people all over the country wherever they had to go. So it was more than just ferrying aircraft, although we're well known for having ferried aircraft. But there were
one thing that would seem to be unique to the female pilot's experience is you had to fly a lot of different types of airplanes.
Yeah.
They didn't just say you're going to be a B-40 pilot or whatever it might be, and that's your emphasis, and you learn that backwards and forwards.
You had no choice as to what aircraft you were going to fly. You had a choice whether you wanted to be in the ferry command or the training command. We all wanted to be in the ferry command because there you got to fly a lot of different aircraft. I, of course, applied for the ferry command, so they, of course, put me in the training command. But that's the way it was. But we just, wherever you were sent in the training command, that's what you flew. I was sent to a UC-78 AT-17 base. That's advanced twin. And one of my jobs was to
test the aircraft. Also, I flew personnel all over the country wherever they had to go. So we did all of the jobs that were to be done in the training command.
We'll talk about your civilian exploits in a little bit, but in the military, how many different types of airplanes did you fly in your time in the military?
Well, I personally only flew about 5 different types of aircraft, but the women as a whole flew every aircraft manufactured from World War II, including the B-29.
Can you tell us your 5?
Yeah. The PT-17, that's a Stearman. The BT-13, that's a 450 horsepower. We did instruments on that. The AT-6, the UC-78, and the AT-17, if you know what they are.
Did you have a favorite?
I think I kind of think it might be the Stearman. You know, my husband was a Stearman instructor for 3.5 years, and we owned, when we were civilians, we owned 3 different Stearmans that we had restored, one of which won Best of Show at the Reading Air Show in Pennsylvania one year, 1969.
What a wonderful airplane.
Yes. Well, it's a very good airplane, and they had been doing primary in the PT-19, which is a low wing. And they wanted to see if they could eliminate one of the phases of training, because it was usually primary, basic, advanced. So they chose the BT-13. So you went directly from the Stearman into the AT-6. Now that was quite a jump, because you went from a 220 horsepower to a 650 horsepower that had all the gadgets, retractable gear, controllable pitch prop, radios, everything, where the Stearman was just an airplane that flew. But the reason they chose those 2 is because the Stearman has a narrow landing gear, and it has a tendency to easily ground loop. The AT-6 also has a narrow landing gear, so that's why they changed it. And it was successful. We were able to jump from primary to advanced. So since it was, again, experimental, they now changed the training of the male cadets and had them go from a primary directly into an advanced aircraft. Oh, we were devastated at being disbanded. I mean, we were doing something for the country, but at the same time we were doing something we loved, and that was flying an aircraft. And the thought of giving up flying was just, it just wasn't going to be, as far as I was concerned. And so I wrote letters to manufacturers, where anyone I could think of, and I never heard no said in so many different ways. So I finally realized that if I did anything, I was going to have to do it all by myself. So I came back to New Jersey, and I got my instructor's rating, and I did freelance instructing. And around that time, they were selling surplus aircraft to the public. So they had to be flown to depots. So I was doing a lot of that ferrying. Then I realized that the aircraft to be manufactured, someone was going to have to bring them in from the factory. I went to the distributor in New York City and said, who's going to be bringing in your Cessnas and your Arankas? And he said, what have you got in mind? And I said, well, I know a lot of pilots, so we can do the ferrying of aircraft. So I started a little ferrying business. That in turn led to my getting a Cessna dealership, which had a wonderful commission set up. Then I parlayed that into becoming a part owner of a flight school. So we had a flight school, and
we were run out of business because the Garden State Parkway was being built, and it took off the end of our runway, and we were out of business. So I was dating my husband-to-be at that time, and he didn't want me working after we were married. And he did own a Staggerwing Beach, beautiful airplane. So that helped. So the two of us, I guess we owned about 14 different aircraft in our lifetime, and we both flew up to our late 70s.